Hi, I'm Charles Galda. Welcome to the Church in Action podcast. We know that when the people of God do the work of God, people want to know Jesus, and that transforms lives, New England, and the world. So in our podcast, we talk about the ingredients that makes that happen, making disciples who do justice and share Jesus to accelerate evangelism. Today, we'll probably hit on some aspect of all three of those. For those keeping score, I had shared on our last podcast, Dr. Connie Lawrence, the Dean of Academics from Portsmouth Christian Academy, would be with us today. A little bit of a schedule change. And so we have instead the head of school, Mike Runey, from Portsmouth Christian Academy, or PCA. Turns out Mike and I, we've just met this morning. That's a little unusual for us. But turns out we've got a whole bunch of friends in common, as is often the case. Mike has a BS in History and Systems Engineering from West Point, an MA from Penn State in History, and an MA in Strategic Studies from the U.S. Army War College. So we're going to talk, I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit about military background in some of our conversation. For those of you who may not know it, Portsmouth Christian Academy is the largest non-denominational Christian school in New England. They've got over 600 students, and they run from preschool to grade 12. Mike, thanks for being with us this morning.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Charles.
Could you share maybe a little, before we get into the meat of it, can you share some of your personal story, where you're from, how'd you wind up in New England and PCA?
Yeah, I was originally born just north of Boston in the old Chelsea Naval Hospital, now closed. My mom was born and raised in the Winchester area. My dad was a military guy, and just before shipping off to Vietnam, he got her home, and closest place to give birth was there. And so really outside of my first year of life when my dad was in Vietnam, I haven't lived in New England. I visited really over 50 years. My aunts, cousins, they all lived in the area. And then in 1991, when my wife and I were coming on active duty, my dad and mom retired from military service, and they retired up in New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire. And so they really sort of staked the flag about in the late 80s, early 90s up here. And then again, we've been visiting in our military lives. My wife and I were in the military both together for a while. She got out. We raised a family all over the world, Korea, Germany, Texas, a couple tours away in Iraq and Afghanistan for me. But in 2019, I retired. So the U.S. military system is what they call an up-or-out system. You can only stay so long. So I was getting close to my 30-year time. I was actually around year 27. And we were down in Virginia, down in the Norfolk, Newport News area, which is a big Navy town, not a lot of Army folks down there. And we were praying about what should be next and different paths, but really sense the Lord calling us to Christian education, calling me. My wife really is the educator of the family. She homeschooled our kids as we moved around for 17 years. And in Virginia, our youngest sons, we have 4 kids, 2 girls, 2 boys. Our sons, we felt called to move them into more formal Christian education. So we had our first formal taste down there. My wife transitioned out of homeschooling. So I was finishing out my career and go, what's next? And felt called for me into Christian education. We looked and prayed all around that area because we really felt called, at least initially, to the southern Chesapeake. And the doors weren't open at that point. A lot of great people. God was doing great things in Christian ed down there, but doors weren't open. So, in the era of Google and search, and ACSI's website just went on, and I found that Portsmouth Christian Academy had an opening. And I hadn't heard about it, but I knew Portsmouth Christian Academy because my dad had been involved in Portsmouth Christian Academy for 15 years. And they hadn't said a thing. They knew I was getting ready to retire, and probably a wisdom of parents at that point. But anyway, talked to my wife, prayed about it, applied for this, and the Lord opened the doors to call us to Christian education in New England, specifically here. And so we're 3 out of the house. We brought our youngest along with us. He's now a senior here at PCA and getting ready to launch out. But we settled here 2 years ago, summer of 2019. And that's how we got to be here. So first time we've had a home, really, that we can think about, Lord, this may be here for a while, other than I think we're moving on average every 2 years. So
and it sounds like the first time you've had a student in a school as opposed to homeschools too.
Yeah, for us, and certainly the Christian school that we were involved in down in Virginia was our first taste of really is a church school, church affiliated school. And again, great school, about half the size of PCA. And that was encouraging. It sort of gave me, and my wife had grown up in a Christian school. And so she had Christian education in her background, and she didn't need any convincing. I just had to learn the process. I was bought in, but I hadn't had any experience with it. And, our second son had 3 years there before he graduated. And I thought, okay, this is not only good for our children, this is good, period. It's good for families. It's good for building the church. It's good for, influencing society for good. So
I want to come back to that, but I also don't want to miss giving you a chance. I gave the briefest thumbnail sketch of what PCA is. Could you kind of put some meat on the bones for folks?
Yeah, so I think you hit the big points, but I'll flesh it out briefly. So Portsmouth Christian Academy is an independent school. So we're independent. We're not affiliated with any single church. In fact, we have over 100 churches represented here on our student body. We're about an hour north of Boston. We're actually in Dover. That's a whole nother story we may touch on as part of what God has done over the years, but started in Portsmouth and now in Dover. And so we serve a community basically from, if you I'm going to try to draw a map in the air here. So you go York, Maine, go up to the Lakes region, and you go basically down to the Newburyport, Topsfield, Mass, sort of that triangle of the seacoast. There are about 200,000 souls in that area. We're a day school. And we draw, as of this morning, actually 585. We're regrowing back up to our historical 600, 625. And we're preschool all the way through 12th grade. So we're a school system unto ourselves. Connie Lawrence, who you mentioned earlier, is our Dean of Academics. She oversees and integrates that curriculum in terms of academic excellence and biblical integrity throughout. And it's just a great privilege to work with a team of educators, Christian educators, who really see that linking all the way through is so important. And then we have the privilege of where we sit, of partnering with a lot of local churches and local ministries to really just see what God's doing in this part. There are other wonderful Christian schools all around the greater Boston area. Some are in our area as well, and we just are so thankful to come alongside and be a part of what God's doing in raising the next generation.
So that's great. Let me give you a challenging question to start with, because so we believe our kids went to public school, but Christian college.
Right.
We believe in Christian education. But we were talking with a friend who was sending one of their kids to Christian college, and a Christian said to them, "Oh, you're sacrificing so much on the quality of education. They're not going to be able to talk about what they think." And it was surprising to hear a Christian say that.
You're right.
But it also belies, I'm sure, a thought process in the secular culture. Disabuse us of the notion that you're going to sacrifice quality and free thought.
Well, I certainly, I'm going to give you sort of two quick perspectives. I think from the school's perspective is that we don't sacrifice either one. In fact, I think, somebody handed me when I took the job, they said, "Mike, remember your school has to have one big idea." It's the old BHAG idea, one very big, hairy, audacious goal. And I said, okay, I get that. I've heard that in the military as well. You have to have unity of effort and focus on the objective. But what I ran into is what we need to do is be able to hold two ideas simultaneously. And one is excellent education, and the other is biblical integrity. And we have to fuse those. And that's that's our big idea. It's a little harder. If God gave us two hands, the way I sort of describe it, Mike, I don't know you, Charles, I'm predominantly left-handed, but I've had to learn how to use my right hand, right? It's actually what limited me in basketball is I really could not do all that super well. But I think when we come to Christian education, there is a tendency, depending on who you're talking to, is they will emphasize one of the two, right? So even our teachers will come in, "Why did you do this?" "Well, I'm really focused on, I'm an excellent educator who is a Christian, and I think it's important." And they'll tend to emphasize or use that hand more than others will come in and say, the discipleship evangelism side is important, and we're going to provide fundamental education, but really this is the spiritual life. And we say, yes, and we're going to do both. And because the kids and the families, and this is where I go from the flip side, is that the families, as we talk to, frankly, they're steering and their children they have different goals as they look at where God's calling them as a family. They're looking at where their children are. Some of them they're focusing in the different areas. And what we want to provide as a school, and we're committed to this, is that we will maximize the God-given potential. We'll seek to do that. Connie challenges me often. She's, again, our dean. And our mission statement, in short, is to maximize each child's God-given potential. And she goes, Mike, there's an assumption in that, is that we understand the God-given potential of each child and we can maximize it. And but we know that parents in particular have an idea of their sons and daughters' God-given potential and work with us to move that in a direction that they sense God is calling them to. That partnership is the other piece. So that I think is the new big idea, that as we look around, especially in COVID, that is different. We recognize at PCA, and I don't think we're unique among Christian schools, that the parents are responsible and need, frankly, the help and encouragement to raise their sons and daughters. We believe that children will have much stronger ties to their God-given family, whether that's by birth or adoption, for longer times, and it'll be more shaping in their lives over longer periods. And hopefully the church will be a big part of that. The school is here for the season, right? Typically for us, up to 15 years, preschool all the way through. And so if we understand our right place and what we can provide that will help a mom and dad, a single grandparent, then we're on good ground, and we can say with confidence, excellent education, biblical integrity that reinforces your Christian worldview or the values and virtues that you want. And we can talk more about who comes to PCA. That's a different question. But we know when we look across the board that our educators are Christians committed to the Christian worldview, committed to living out Christian life and passing that along. And that can happen because all of these men and women have gone to both Christian in business, both under secular leadership, good, some of it very good. They've done it in civilian academy. They've achieved their PhDs. I mean, these are men and women who've come back together to form this school that have gone out and walked the walk. And yet they're given the freedom and the imperative to meld those two, whereas they're wonderful Christian educators in the public school. I don't doubt that.
Yeah.
I know some of them. That's a different mission field, and some parents may be called to that for a season. I shared with you before, I'm a public school product.
Yeah.
And some are called to the homeschool community. But there's a real role, I believe, for excellent biblically foundational Christian education. And it supports both of those.
Yep. And you guys are accredited just like any other school has to be accredited. And I saw you have a dual accreditation, one from a Christian accreditor and one from a secular accreditor.
Right, it's true. Yeah. So Charles, actually schools don't have to be accredited. I don't know if you know that. A lot of schools aren't. But we are. I mean, it's been a long history of the school, well before we got here. In fact, we just finished up our reaccreditation with NEASC, which is the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. And Connie Lawrence, in fact, worked with a team on there to form, though secular, is that there's a specific Christian education accreditation component that NEASC recognizes.
Okay.
So that's positive. We also thought that it was important to maintain dual accreditation with this ACSI, Association of Christian Schools International.
Okay.
So we think it's important to do both. And frankly, to be viewed, we believe that our standards are sufficient to be viewed both internally and externally from what I call the Christian community as being excellent.
And when I looked at I saw in your annual report, the list of schools kids were graduating into for college, it doesn't suggest that you guys sacrifice academics at all. It's a pretty competitive list of schools.
Yeah. So if you aspire to, if the family and the students aspire to the best schools in the nation and can get there and want to get there, and we encourage them and enable them to get there. I mean, we have a young woman who has a good shot at getting into Yale this year. We have a young man who went down to Baylor, full ride medical school scholarship, just got a note from his mom this morning, just again, selected for another level of really mentorship down there at Baylor Med. it's a pre-med program, but they're fast tracking him.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, I tell you, Charles, that we get it. So sometimes in the same family, you can see this as you get another, and the son or daughter is not called to that level, and they're called to the trades, and we want to bless that.
Oh yeah.
And so what we've started.
Anybody who's tried to find a carpenter and plumber knows
Yep.
somebody needs to be blessing that.
And it's a real area of ministry, right?
Yep.
They're coming into homes. They're meeting real specific needs. So increasingly, we've said we have to prepare you. There is an academic and a spiritual preparation for both of those.
Yep.
Our history is that really focusing you on succeeding in college. And we believe that if we prepare you to do that, in the main, you'll be right on track. But we've also started partnering locally with some of the trades. We've encouraged our students to prayerfully consider military service for a variety of reasons. It's a mission field. We think of it that way. And then also for missions, right out of high school for a period of time. Just that, what is your calling, right? So if we're growing you to potential, our vision are Christ-centered graduates impacting the world for good.
And so you've touched a little bit where it's very clear that faith influences the curriculum. And so what are the kind of key ways, or is there a philosophical approach to that? Or is it educate me a little bit maybe on how does that play a role in it? Like, how do you teach science maybe that's a good question, right?
Yeah, no, it is. It's a good one. And we can use, I'll run the sciences back, in a second, but if we start with the end in mind, which I think is always a good place to start. So we talk about Christ-centered graduates, impacting the world for good. And just for clarity, different Christian schools have a different approach to student bodies. So PCAs as independent school, we have both an evangelistic as well as discipleship component to what we do. I call them little E and little D. Really, that I think the church has the largest responsibility, and the families do in this. But we reinforce it. But our staff and faculty all have to be, sign a statement of faith and affirm that through their life and what they do and how they teach. But our student body does not. We're explicitly clear with our families as they apply that we're a Christian school who will teach historical, orthodox, biblical principles that span across Christendom, right, that are consistent. And we're not going to not do that. It is a course, Portsmouth Christian Academy, as the emphasis is on Christian, but they don't have to come. And to give you a feel, that basically means as of this year, and it's been pretty consistent, about 1 out of 5 families come and do not have any church affiliation. So 4 out of 5 have some that they self-identify with of a Christian church. Again, all through the Seacoast. But we're clear up front philosophically of how we're going to teach. And we recognize that in the course of that, we tell folks, and we're going to introduce them to the living God, right? Jesus Christ and the gospel are going to be presented in multiple ways over the many years that they're here. As you know, it motivates and forms how we live our lives. So my whole point is that is integrated, starting with the teacher, right? And how he and she, as the kids move through and grow into young men and young women, that they're interfacing with mentors who are reflecting Christ. Yeah. That's number one, and it is the most compelling of them all. The curriculum reinforces it all the way through. Everything from opening ceremonies and the devotional every day, really honoring God and glorifying Him, to our Bible curriculum that starts all the way in preschool, and then it sort of manifests itself through. In junior high, we begin small groups. There's a chapel program all the way through age appropriate as we go. Small groups start in junior high. Junior high is when they first read whole books of the Bible and study them. They get they get Genesis, Acts, John, and I believe Exodus. They're going to cover in the junior high years. And then there's a whole Bible curriculum at the high school level, New Testament, Old Testament. We have missions focus church history, but we also have systematic theology, right? Introduction to systematic theology as an elective. But on the educational side, that's all there. But you get up to the high school level, again, how do you live in community? We're not the church, but we are a gathering of believers. And so chapel and small group is now every week. Our students are the small group leaders. Junior high, the adults are the small group leaders. We train our small group leaders. We look who they are. We look for the spiritual qualities, develop them. And then we really try to foster an idea of what is it like to live in community. And as we know, that's pretty messy on an everyday basis where we're close enough and rubbing up on each other enough. We see the good and the not good. So I guess in the life of the school, you don't find that in many other settings in America today. It just doesn't exist. So I would say that the end result are young men and women who graduate from PCA. They know the gospel. And when they say they're Christ-centered, some have answered the call to follow after Jesus. Some know who Jesus is. They know the truth, and they're able to reference. They can center their life, sort of like a far distant, true North Star. They can do that. And we trust that God's at work.
Yeah. So
I think that's the overarching philosophy. And we have not only done that, I think that we've called them to something outside of themselves. I've been looking at, relatively new to this, and Charles, I'd be interested in what you see, but a lot of, well-established schools, mostly not Christian, are all about what I call, the result is the best, most authentic me now, right? So as if the whole world revolved around the student.
And that we actually want people who are the authentic me, right?
Yeah, we had that discussion.
There's a lot of negative authentic me out there, as we've seen.
I don't think, you all want to see the authentic me. There's a bad movie, I think, a few years ago about somebody who couldn't stop saying what he was really thinking. He'd being truly authentic. It was not pretty.
Yeah. So let me play the role of skeptic. So Mike, if you're teaching, New Testament, Old Testament, books of the Bible, all those things, clearly you don't have time for French and marine science and and sports. And so I know I'm wrong, but I want to give you the chance to speak to it.
Yeah, no, it's a legitimate question because it's a real challenge. It comes down to, what opportunities do we provide for your sons and daughters? We've really come down to the three foundational threads that all education is built on. And this is not new. I mean, for us, this is the Christian worldview. Biblical education is foundational, along with mathematics. It starts to move into sciences pretty quickly. That is also integrated with language arts, and they're not like independent layers. I mean, they interact with each other, right? The curriculum rides on those three all the way through, and it's consistent. What we add on top of that are opportunities, some of which we require students to do, others that we offer, especially as you get older, is to move down the lines of what you're interested in. We require all of our third graders to take violin, right? So most schools, I don't know about you, I grew up in public school. I mean, I barely sang in chorus, right?
They'd have paid me not to play the violin, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably. And I'm not saying early on it's challenging, but it's amazing to hear these third graders at the end of the year. But as we know, I mean, if music is the universal language, or is a universal language, we have the research to back it up. That's really important. And then you take it through to the electives. We have an 8th grader who really is an excellent musician, a trumpeter. He's playing with our high school symphony. So we have 150 kids in the high school. And if you aspire to play and you feel called to that, that's where you can play at. I mean, we have 2 graduates last year. I mean, they're going to the best music schools in the country this year, and it played. Cord Bossman is at Berkeley down in the Boston area, doing a double major. I just saw him at homecoming. I mean, and granted, he's feeling the pressure, but I mean, that program he got into is the best course at all-state trumpeter. And so, we got So Will Kuzman's down at I think he's down at in Tennessee, again working on sound engineering, all-state jazz vocalist. And so I guess my point, if you just take the arts thread through, but you take the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics through, you can do the same thing. And again, there's a foundation that we require. But if you want to take dual enrollment, anatomy and physiology and get college credit here, you can do that. You want to take marine biology right down. I've got the river right there, right? The Bellamy River, right on the waterfront. Marine biology is more than theoretical. We have a brackish saltwater river, like 150 feet that way, and we run our own labs off the river. So,
it's a beautiful campus. Folks might want to Google it and take a look. It's a beautiful campus right on the river.
Yeah. So go to, if you want to sort of get a 3D view, go to Google Maps or whatever and do a view of it. It's amazing.
And you have what languages?
So Mandarin and Spanish are our two primary, because we believe that's how, other than English, those are our human languages. We started to emphasize increasingly that music is a language. Mathematics is its own form of communication in a language. And so we should not de-emphasize that. In fact, we're emphasizing mathematics more as a discipline and way of thinking. And then obviously through computers, and where we see the 21st century and how computers are enabling us to cross the human barrier divide. But we do believe still that the human language, the ability, the God-given brain to process and communicate across, is more than just practical. It has another component to it. And so Spanish and Mandarin are two.
Okay. And I saw track and field and student council, and all kinds of competitive events you're doing with other schools, I assume, in the area, like History B and things like that. And your guys win them.
We do. I think, again, I go back to, you stand on the shoulders of those that, came before you. But one of the, they're again, different callings, different visions. But PCA's calling years ago was that we are going to be an excellent school that integrates with the larger community, participates with, in sports and athletics and academic teams, competes with, that we're going to be distinct but a part of. And so we're part of the New Hampshire Intercollegiate Athletic Association. So we play the public schools as well as other Christian schools. Concord, we have a wonderful friendly rivalry with Concord Christian just down the road. And, we just are thrilled to see them excel as well. But what we like to say is, I'll pull up, I won't give you her name, but I was just looking at, I'm going to tell you about one of our juniors. She's really, really gifted, interested student, leader, athlete. So she's taken AP Calculus with Grove City College. So new partnership with another Christian school, dual enrollment. She's doing really well. It's challenging. Taking a true college course. She's taking honors orchestra, anatomy, dual enrollment, anatomy and physiology. This is a junior, mind you. This is not a senior.
Yeah.
Dual enrollment with a lab. She's taking AP Spanish and honors world history. She's a captain on the soccer team. They just went to the state quarterfinals again against all these other public schools. And we're on the smaller side of the schools, even in our division. She's a student government leader. She has all those opportunities. By the way, she just is a great young woman who has a great time and lifts everybody else up. So,
and what you've been saying that's suddenly reminding me is when both our kids went to Gordon College, and I remember the big driver as we were thinking about where to send them was about the solid academics.
Yeah.
But also a context that reinforces what we've been trying to teach them and develop in them as parents who are tasked by God with some responsibility here,
right?
As opposed to throwing them into a field where actually there's a lot at that age. I don't want them to have to defend their faith to a PhD and something, right? Because they're just not equipped at that stage to do it.
Right.
I want someone to reinforce the values, morals of our faith and equip them in that. And I'm hearing you're doing that, but at a younger age.
we're trying to, plant those seeds earlier. I mean, we firmly believe that when you can, God's word will not return void, right? So planning that, memorizing it, talking about it, that's part of it. But also, Connie Lawrence reminds us all truth is God's truth. All this knowledge is God's knowledge. Let's introduce it and appropriately challenge them. I think that's the big thing that we really want to get at. I mean, this young woman I shared, she's got both a desire and a real potential and is moving into all of that. And so how do we appropriately challenge her, not over challenge her, not demand it, but at the same time, we can offer the breadth. Some of it here on campus, some of it is we're increasingly partnering with other, Christian schools in particular. But I think your point, Charles, is really, really key. And we know this, that outside of one's parents, that there need to be at least what they say is about 5 adults who know your son and daughter, my son and daughter, well enough to speak into their lives as they're forming that identity of who they are and how to answer the big questions of life. Mm-hmm. The more of those we can get before they head off to college, the better. That's why I think Christian education in the pre-K through 12 really makes a lot of sense, is because we can come alongside moms and dads like you with your kids. And there's a real value in that. And we're seeing it. Our graduates come back and tell us, by and large, there's no doubt some of them are really still struggle, right? They tell us they're still working through a lot of this, but they have those seeds planted. They're germinating. Good men and women are coming alongside moms and dads and young men and women to navigate what God has for them.
Now, Connie, what got me started thinking about doing this podcast was Connie and I were just talking one day, and I just said, "Hey, how's enrollment going right during COVID? Tough time."
Right.
And she's like, "It's booming." She's like, "There has been so much interest over the last year and a half in Christian education, pre-college. I imagine maybe at the college level too, but she was speaking specifically for you guys with pre-college. What's going on there that you think that in the last year and a half it's been such a significant thing?"
Yeah, I think there are 2 things that are broadly happening, and I'm talking to colleagues, across the board. The first is that almost all the Christian schools last year committed to being open in some way, shape, or form. Frankly, some of this is due to our parents said, "Hey, thank you so much for all you did on emergency remote learning in the spring of 2019, but that's not what we're for, right?" And so we heard them loud and clear. We found ways, communicated. And so I think last year was largely a response of parents who had the vision and commitment to find a way for their kids to continue to grow and learn. And as schools are willing to find it out too. Credit really, in my mind, goes to teachers who are willing to take the risk and figure out how to do it, health-wise, but also knowing that we would have to be on-site and off-site. So last year was COVID, and our willingness to, we said, put parents in the driver's seats on whether the kid would be on-site, off-site, even as we ran through several waves of COVID. This year, there's an element of that, but it's mostly driven by values. And so what we've read broadly, but with the parents who came in this year, and we had over 150 new students this year, is that we were hearing everything was laden in, most of them were laden in value terms, and they weren't always specific. But what we sensed is that they had gotten a look-see into how their kids were being educated, and that's not what they wanted. Yeah. And so I think we really focused on identifying why mom and dad were bringing their kids to even consider PCA. And we really tried to be clear where we could meet them. And we found for 150 of them that was a really good alignment. So, I think we're going to see that for several years as the options become more clear. And what we heard from some other schools and some folks who advise us is that those Christian schools who maintained their commitment to biblical orthodoxy, little o orthodoxy, are thriving.
It's interesting. So first lesson is, if you want to sell your product, if I can put it, I'm a corporate guy. So if you want to sell your product, your business has to be open.
Yes.
It's one less. But the second piece of it is reminding me, there's a piece in the Wall Street Journal a week or two ago, and this, I forget who wrote it, but it was a piece, and he was saying that a lot of parents, because kids were home for school, saw that what their kids were being taught, and either landed on A, I'm not terribly impressed with how much education they're actually experiencing during the day, or B, I don't like the education they're experiencing during the day. And it sounds like those are both playing a little bit of a role, at least in what you're saying.
Yeah, they definitely are. I think for us, the values really seems to be the bigger thing. We have just done we assess the students' growth 3 times during the year, but the fall and spring are particularly important. So we just did our fall assessment. So these are our new kids. Where are they? We do some assessment on the way in. So we're selective to some degree on how you come in. And we can talk about that down the road if you want. But I think that we really got our first baseline across the student body. And what we found briefly was that our kids last year didn't experience learning loss at all. It was a challenging year period, but we didn't see that across the board. In fact, we saw some growth. And, we're starting to benchmark this group that just came in, because that was a big question for us. Great kids, families want to be here. How much did you lose? We know typically where a third grader coming in would land. What about all the new third graders coming in? I just use that as an example. And while there is some real difference between last year to this year, we can see the gap, the COVID gap. We're confident, because of what we saw last year with last year's new students, that they will grow through it, right? So they're here in person predominantly. Only as necessary do we use offsite learning, which is pretty rare. I mean, 98-point-something% of the time, kids are on campus in their seats with their friends, learning from a live teacher. So,
and so, Mike, you're just making me think. After the violence at the Capitol on January 6th, I got quite a bit of feedback of people who saw people there being violent, carrying Jesus signs, right? Regardless of whether they're involved in violence or not, some were, but saying, okay, so you're Christian, you're white, so you voted for Donald Trump, so you supported the violence, and you're a white supremacist. And so, Mike, I want to give you a chance to respond to. So are kids going to learn so the idea is there's a big fight right now, specifically around CRT, that I think is distorted like much of the dialogue in our country today, is CRT is a real thing. And there's some philosophical underpinnings to it that a lot of people would object to. Some people say, well, it's just a teaching about the truth of our history on race. And I think there's some disingenuousness in some of that debate, at least. Will kids learn? So are you teaching hey, everything has always been wonderful in America and everything's great? Or do you grapple, without delving into some of the underpinnings behind CRT, do you actually deal with the reality of race in our history?
Yeah, so it's fundamentally back to the worldview that we teach the fallenness of man and the hope of Christ and how that's manifested over time. We all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Again, going back pre-U.S. history, how has that shown itself through? How's it shown itself through here? And do we sense God has moved? My background, if I have one, is in history, right? And so one of the things there was a line of history, especially coming out of Christian circles in the about a generation or two ago, that I think sort of painted this grand arc narrative that that missed some things, that overlooked some things. They weren't asking the questions that if this is true, which it wasn't necessarily untrue, then how do we account for this? And so, history is driven by the questions we ask of it. And it's important that we teach our kids how to ask those questions, whether it's of scripture, how to critically think about them, how to rely on the resources. But ultimately, there is a grand narrative of fallenness, of rescue, redemption, and restoration, right? That's the Christian worldview. That's the overarching arc, and God has used that. And so, yes, they will see the ugliness. They're going to see, and in fact, we were down in Virginia. We were right where those first African Americans were brought and sold on the soil. Oh, by the way, that's also the same ground where they were first liberated in the Civil War. And we're going to teach that. And I think an open question is, well, how could society in coastal Virginia even move through the iterations of slavery that they did in the 16 and 1700s, right? So we ended up with chattel slavery. That's a legitimate historical and biblical question. It has moral and ethical components that resonate today with the unborn, with the disenfranchised, with those on the margins. At the same time, we're going to, in fact, I've got, an 8th grade history book, and we, as you can imagine, we've gone back into our own history. This is a secular book, but we teach it with the Christian perspective. But I mean, we have, a debate in here between some of the early 100 years ago of the civil rights leaders debating, one of which is more of a secular socialist view of solution. The other is a Christian, how do we really empower the disenfranchised, and both within the Black community, and how we do that. The internal debate they have, we teach that. I mean, I think a lot of schools do, but we teach that here, and we follow it through at different times.
I'm going to push back. I'm not convinced a lot of schools do.
well, I don't know if, and again, let me put it this way: if they use the textbook, it's all right in front of us.
Okay.
Right. And so, to your point, we're not going to shy away from the fact that our forebears, men and women before us, have been asking these hard questions in a different context at a different time, but very similar questions. And there were, I think, God honoring victories, but there were also some real setbacks, and people were hurt. And we're not going to shy away from that, because I don't think, as you read scripture, God doesn't shy away from that.
Yeah.
If you live it out in our churches, we shouldn't be shying away from it. So the bottom line is that I think we have a gospel-oriented approach to teaching history. Where I was going to go back to and just touch on is, I have found it as a Christian historian, again, if I'm anything in academia, it would be that, is to be able to go, God's hand did this at this time. The only time I feel we can rely on that is in scripture, where he has revealed that. I do think we can sit back and go, wow, it seems like God was clearly at move, and we can get outlines of it. And it's, I don't know about you, it's exciting, it's motivating. I mean, one of the things that encouraged my wife, Christy, and me when we were praying and thinking about coming up is that despite what we read in Pew and Barna, and I'm not criticizing what they said about New England, but basically a spiritual wasteland, we came up and we started to see all that God was doing, had been doing for years. Yeah. And we kind of went, wow. And that's true. Yeah. And so again, specifics are hard to go, God did this and this is why, but there's no doubt. And when you look at history, you can see that. And it, instead of discouraging, you can drink the cup of reality that also with it has the cup of hope of the gospel. You can ask the hard question of history, and you're motivated to go out and live your life really with a, Micah 6:8 type approach.
Yeah, my work takes me all over New England, all different Christian leaders in all kinds of different contexts and stuff. And all we ever hear is unchurched, unchurched, unchurched. And it's true. But that masks exactly what you're saying. There are amazing things God is doing all over New England. And there are people who I work with who've been here 40 years in ministry. And they're saying, and I've never seen anything like this before. There's something different going, right? So there's something going on in New England that's exciting.
Yeah.
They put names like revival to it. I won't do that because I don't know what God's doing.
Right. Yeah.
But who knows, right? But he's doing something, I accept based on their experience, he's doing something different and unique and certainly amazing at times today.
Amen. Yeah, we see that on the campus and off campus, but it's, I'm picking it up as I get to know the community. I'm picking it up more and more, talk to pastors in the area, families. It's really encouraging.
And so, Mike, you mentioned a little bit about the acceptance process. And so how do I'm sure there's a couple of scenarios. I'm a high school kid and I want to come, or I'm a preschool kid and I want to come and be in the city. How do you get in and stay in? What does that look like? Yeah,
good question. So the get in is, go to pcaschool.org. That's our website, and start to explore the school, and the application process is right there. So we're looking at a couple things, as you would imagine. Why do I want to come? Are we aligned with parents? What we don't want to do is really confuse the kids regardless of preschoolers or high schoolers, that we really want to be aligned with parents, right, as to why you're here. And, that alignment can be straight on, it could be pretty close, but we don't want to be like that. So that's the first thing we're looking at. We say an excellent biblical education for everybody who wants one. The second is that we want to make sure that our student will thrive here in terms of academics. Increasingly, we're finding that that's a challenge, especially the later you come to the school. So Connie Lawrence, who looks at this, our dean, works with the teachers, and we have a program that isn't full-on special ed that can help bridge some gaps here, which is pretty unique for a Christian school, is that we can only take on so much capacity. And so we're going to ask the moms and dads, hey, we're going to do some assessment and testing to make sure that we can appropriately challenge your sons and daughters, and they will fit well with their cohort as they move through. And so that they can really all maximize the potential. And of course, there's a range, but we really want to keep it a pretty tight shot group and make sure that your son or daughter is placed in the right grade at the right level. So we do that as well. And I think if we can get those two lined up well, and we have capacity, that's a new thing for us, is we're actually running out of capacity in certain grades, then the offer of admission will come. As you can imagine, a lot of families struggle to bring those real resources together. And so it's typically at that point that if finances are a limiting factor, is that we have a program called variable tuition. You can find it again on the website, and how you apply for it. It's a little bit different approach than traditional tuition assistance and scholarships, but fundamentally that's what we do. So really 3 parts. Are you aligned? Academic fit for your child, and can we support your child based on needs, and how to make the financial systems work? It's all on the site.
And give the URL again, please, Mike.
It's PCA, Papa Charlie Alpha, school.org.
You can see your military coming through right there.
Well,
because you might have said Portsmouth Christian Academy school.
Yeah, right. Yep. So old habits die hard.
No, that's good. And thank you for your service too.
Oh, it's a calling, right? The Lord calls. It was a calling. It's a privilege. It was challenging at times. My heart's out to everyone who's serving mission field, military, first responders, our healthcare workers, increasingly our Christian educators in particular, whether they're all service. And
Mike, so if I'm listening and I'm living in the Seacoast area, it's pretty clear what I can do. There's a lot of folks in our audience who won't be anywhere near the Seacoast.
Right.
Is there a place for people to go and find Christian schools?
Yeah. So ACSI, Association of Christian Schools International, is one. We're affiliated with that. There are other Christian school organizations. I'm just blanking right now. You can go on the website and there are locators there. I'd certainly encourage you to do that. Increasingly, I would just type into Google Christian school near me.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is we're all learning how to make sure that if you're searching for that, you'll find us. And I, that's a simple one. I'd certainly go there. The other one that we've been increasingly partnering with is niche.com, niche.com, has a whole Christian school subcomponent of both higher ed and then K-12 education, public and private, is another place to go look. And they start to bring in evaluations of the school for moms and dads as well. So those would be the 3 that I would say.
That's helpful. I think there's, it seems to be right that you guys are experiencing, there's so much division in our culture, but there's so much indoctrination and lack of progress, especially over the last year in education, that it's really stirring up a lot. And I am having a lot of pastors raise the issue. I think we actually need to start thinking as parents and pastors theologically about then how does Christian education fit into this? And how do we help families figure this out? Because it may not be the right answer for everybody, and it may not even be practical for everybody, but there's some things we need to figure out about how we are educating our children, because they're certainly being taught things that as believers, we have a problem with, and now we need to figure out how we raise our kids that way, right?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would encourage, the listeners, especially pastors, elders of churches in the area, is to, if you haven't already or recently, is really talk to the Christian educators, Christian schools in your area. If you have homeschool movements, how do we combine? How do we build these coalitions and support each other? I do think we're at a different moment. And again, I'm relatively new to Christian ed. I'm not new to how to operate in contentious environments and seize opportunities that seem to be in front of us. But, I'll give you an example. We got invited up to a missions week, and, PCA got to, in front of the church, got to talk about Christian education as a mission field worthy of being considered both to support and to participate in. And so those are areas I think I would encourage the pastors and churches in the area to consider.
That's great advice, Mike. Thanks for taking time to be with us. Thanks for sharing with us and educating us a little bit on this too, and give us some stuff to think about. For our listeners, thanks for listening. Hope you heard something in here that will guide you as whether you're parents or grandparents or kids, right? As you think about where you're going educationally and with your spiritual formation and being made into a disciple, this all becomes really, really relevant. And so I encourage you to think about it. I'd like to thank our producer, Ashley Pitkin, the Luis Palau Association, who sponsors our podcast and makes it possible, who's dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church and impacting cities worldwide. If you like this, please share it, follow us. It's available on Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and Facebook. And you can find more on visionnewengland.org. Our next episode is November 11th, Veterans Day. And we'll have Kevin Palau with us, actually, from our sponsor. He's president and CEO of Luis Palau Association. And we'll be talking about a recent evangelism report they did for the city of Portland, doing a lot of research. And they came up with 9 key findings, and every single one of them applies to New England. We think we're unique, and we are, but boy, Portland is in the same boat we're in, and there's a lot to glean and learn from it. So it'll be a great conversation. So see you then, Mike. Thanks again.
God bless. Thank you so much.
You too.